shade upon shade. Yet higher than their tops rose the vine-covered wall of paradise. From that delicious enclosure of gentle breezes, fanned from the odours of spice and nature's perfume.
What is paradise? To some, it's a cold beer on a warm afternoon. But the word paradise actually means walled enclosure, and its origins come from the Persian words para, which means around, and deza, which means wall. So I'm off in search of paradise to see how the wall garden has evolved from its Persian origins and how they metamorphosised into their more recognisable form as a functional kitchen garden. Walled gardens reached their peak in Edwardian times, but lost their way after 2 world wars. Today they've been reinvented and restored, and we'll be seeing how. Walled gardens have been part of our heritage for thousands of years. Their history is our history, and each one has a story to tell. In 1994, an ambitious plot was hatched to restore the kitchen garden at Tatton Park in Cheshire, and in doing so, revive old forgotten gardening techniques. After 10 years of hard work and with the aid of the Lottery Fund, plans eventually got off the ground and work started.
This is the biggest kitchen garden project that the Cheshire County Council and the National Trust have ever embarked upon. And we're really excited about the fact that we can take those old Edwardian skills and we can conserve them and we can teach them to other people so that they can get the enjoyment.
We spent a year at Tatton and we'll be seeing how their walled garden developed over that time and the lengths they've gone to recreate the epitome of an Edwardian kitchen garden.
1911 is the very pinnacle of achievement in horticultural terms here at Tatton. It's the point at which, just before the outbreak of war, the garden was working to full capacity.
The walled garden not only supplied the mansion with its demands for fruit, vegetables and flowers in the quantity, diversity and continuity
the wealthy expected, but served as the essential base from which all the horticultural activities derived.
It's been a bit of detective work to start with, looking for the right books, the right journals of the day to plant this garden in a historical way, to find the right varieties, to find the right methods of planting, the right ways of cultivation. And really the easiest way we've done that is to exclusively use one book, which is The Gardener's Assistant from 1925.
This whole area was down to a bare canvas, so we started from scratch, nothing. And we had architects and contractors coming in to repair the walls, but the hard graft was down to the 3 gardeners plus all the volunteers.
With the groundwork under their belt, it's now time to start the task of gardening the Edwardian way. How's it going, Simon?
Early days, Joe, but we're getting there.
Good. Well, we're going to come back here and see how it develops. But if we go back to the origins of the walled enclosure, you've got to get these pretty images of the Edwardian garden out of your mind. It began life very differently. Here at the Ismaili Centre in London is a modern representation of one of the earliest forms of walled gardens, dating back to 600 AD. Well, Penelope, this is a far cry from the traditional walled garden as I know it.
Well, of course, because this is a Persian garden, and a Persian garden is the Muslims' concept of paradise. It has a sacred element, and it's a foretaste of heaven to come, literally. You're sitting in a walled garden with the water murmuring and fountains playing, and you believe that this is what you're going to find when you go to heaven. So it is the terrestrial paradise, literally the foretaste of heaven to come. So it's a very different concept from the sort of vegetable walled garden.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you know, to actually believe that we're on a roof garden in the middle of central London.
It is an oasis, isn't it?
It is.
Which is what we're meant to feel.
Yeah.
They are contemplative, meditative gardens. You don't do very much in them, you sit.
Yeah.
You know, we're all too feverish in our gardens. We're like actors on the stage, rushing around, turning it into theatre. They didn't at all.
Yeah.
They saw it as a place for religious contemplation and improvement, I think. You know, I think they felt that to go and sit, you were getting closer to God. the pattern of what we call the quadripartite garden, the fourfold garden, which is called a sharbar, meaning four and garden, comes really from irrigation. Because if you are bringing water in from outside to a walled enclosure, you really need to have right angles and straight lines. You get canals of irrigation. Also, I think that it has a lot of symbolic meaning. The rivers of life cross in the centre, where you usually either have a fountain or some sort of small mausoleum, just like here, which is quite beautiful. The walls are simply for safety against drifting sand and against marauders, animal and human. And also they had these terrible spirits of the desert, the jinns, which threatened them if they went out there. And outside, literally, in a hot country, it's thirst and then death. So this is an oasis. If you live in a desert country, you welcome anything that will grow, but you can't grow anything without water. So water for them became the very spirit of life. And round water was built all the other ideas. So that was absolutely essential. But of course, they started with, long before Islam, they would have just been rows of fruit trees.
So trees were absolutely crucial.
For shade as well. You know, they planted them in serried ranks. And they had apricots and walnuts and pomegranates.
Right,
and it must have been heaven.
All around, trees of the noblest kind, trees laden with the fairest fruit and blossom of bright rainbow colours, of which the glad sun mixed his golden hue.
Here in Tatton's walled garden, trees are very, very important. Not only the trees for producing the fruit, but also the trees outside the walled garden for protecting it, which was originally a screen, if you like, as well. I mean, it screened the view from the house to the garden. You know, it's a pretty unsightly place, lots of smells and foul language, keep it away. But it also performs a really good function in that it helps protect some of these productive trees. There's the northern shelter belt and there's the western shelter belt behind us. Those are protecting this garden from very damaging winter and spring winds.
And inside here, you've got a huge variety of trees. Where do they all come from?
Well, we've tried to date all the trees to 1911 and earlier, which was the date that this restoration is to recreate. And to that end, in 1911, there's about a choice of 2,000 varieties, which is an enormous variety of apple. Now it's much less. But what we've done is got a very good cross-section of maybe 100 varieties of apple that was probably grown in this area in 1911. I mean, we even got an apple that comes from the Roman period, a custard apple.
Thank God for the Romans, eh? They're another link in the story of the evolution of the walled garden. Fishbourne Palace in West Sussex dates back to the 1st century. This model accurately conjures up what the largest domestic Roman building in Britain must have looked like. It is key to finding out more about the origins of the walled garden in the UK.
So this was built in the 1st century. That's very early.
It is. It's actually the first walled garden in Britain.
Wow. That's amazing.
It is amazing, and it would have been completely overawing for anybody who came here because they weren't used to these huge rectilinear structures, nor were they used to having an enclosed space like this. There would have been 4 huge wings forming a rectangle around the gardens, and the walls were plastered. Now, we don't know whether they were all painted, but certainly on the west wing they actually painted flowers and plants growing so that even in winter you'd have some colour in the garden.
Wow, I mean, in the 1st century, this must have been completely alien to the landscape around it, and I suppose the people must have seen it, you know, just sort of coming and landing in this space. Must have been amazing.
The Romans were very keen in imposing themselves on nature. So what this garden was saying is we can control nature completely. This is where nature was beaten into submission in this garden. Nothing was allowed to be out of place.
Enough of upper-class living. What did the middle-class Roman have as a garden?
The average Roman person would have in the country just a little enclosed garden, but of course a lot of people in the Roman period were actually moving into towns, and this is where the Roman garden really comes into its own for the ordinary person. You would shut the door on the noise and dust and dirt of the street behind you. And in front of you would have this vista, perhaps glimpsed through pillars of your garden, a beautiful green space. There was silence, flowers, scent, perhaps the sound of water.
Oh, like a sort of an oasis, heaven.
It would be like heaven.
But also they were incredibly flexible spaces, weren't they?
They were. They really were treated like rooms outside. Private space which could be used for relaxing, for walking. One of the main uses for a Roman garden was, of course, for eating, and they had a special area called the triclinium where people would eat regularly outside, usually shaded by a grapevine on a pergola.
Just like us today with our parasol and our barbecue.
Very much like we do today. They really very much enjoyed clipping and shaping things, and in fact some of the writers write about the fantastic patterns. People used to clip their names into their hedges or even have naval battles and things in their hedging, really showing off how skillful they were at their gardening.
So really they were very advanced in their horticultural techniques.
Their techniques were very advanced, but some of them would sound very bizarre to us. For instance, there's one story told by Columella, which is if you have a real problem with caterpillars in your garden, what you need to do is you need to find a virgin, and you have to ask her to walk around your garden 3 times with her hair undone and her robe undone as well, preferably at midnight. And at this point, all the caterpillars will actually fall from the trees.
That's brilliant. Imagine going to the garden centre and saying, excuse me, have you got any virgins? Because I've got a real problem with caterpillars.
I think you'd have a hard job.
I think so too.
But of course they were very practical. They had lots of ideas about gardening which we would think nowadays were perfectly correct. The things that we do, for instance, raising asparagus. If you've read the instructions for raising asparagus, they are very much what we would do now, and they work. So they were very scientific in some ways, but very strange in others.
Plant the seeds in the drill after the vernal equinox, placing 2 or 3 seeds in each hole. Cover the seeds with soil and a thick layer of manure.
It would be no surprise if this Roman advice turned up in the book the Tatton Park restoration team are using, an Edwardian manual dating back to 1925.
We really didn't know how much seed to buy in our first year. Chapter 1 of the Gardener's Assistant recommends the amounts of seed you would need for 1 acre of ground for a year.
Between the rows may be planted borecole or Brussels sprouts. Beans may be succeeded by celery.
But the book goes into great detail about what crop can follow which other crop. And it's done on the lines of the Paris market gardens and the London market gardens, who really forged the way in this kind of horticulture, ensuring that you got very quick, early, high-quality crops. The important thing about this restoration is actually growing things that are particular to Cheshire. We're also trying to stock the garden with varieties from 1911 and earlier, such as the Manchester market celery, the Timperley early rhubarb that we grow here. And it only gives an idea of what it was like here at Tatton, but it gives people, visitors, a taste of what it was like to be growing vegetables at the turn of last century.
Manchester method of celery. Near Manchester, where excellent celery is produced, the trenches are taken out 18
inches wide, a foot deep. Then 9 inches deep compost is introduced, so that the plants are thus within 3 inches of their original surface. The trenches should be cut out with sides as nearly perpendicular as the texture of the soil will permit, except near the top. They should be made, if possible, as wide at the bottom.
If we're doing this with a self-blanching modern variety of celery, we'd just put them out straight out onto well-manure ground. You wouldn't have to dig a trench out. You certainly wouldn't have to be beveling the sides and backfilling with manure and all this kind of thing. So it's probably put a good 2 or 3 hours onto the job of a normal operation of putting vegetables out.
The celery has been 3 months in the ground, battling against the elements.
The next step with this Manchester celery trench is to blanch the young plant, which means really to exclude any light from these young, vigorous stems. And the way we do that is to gather this young plant up and to put a newspaper or brown paper collar around it to stop any of the soil that you're going to infill on the trench getting inside the heart of the plant, which will spoil the lovely white, sweet celery as it develops. It's the start of winter now, and it's about 6 to 8 weeks since we've earthed this celery up. I think it's now time that we had a look and see how well it's been blanched. One of the great things about growing these varieties is actually preserving these varieties for posterity. So here goes. That's rather nice. Different. It's certainly a taste of 19th century England, yeah.
Whilst the gardeners at Tatton pick up on old skills left to them by the Edwardians, during the medieval period the monks picked up on the horticultural advice left to them by the Romans.
But that wasn't all they left behind. Those Roman courtyards surely inspired these cloistered garths where medieval monks would come to pray and contemplate and grow a few herbs.
The walled garden may have had a fountain or a tree of life in the centre to represent the Garden of Eden, but it was a minimalist, unadorned place. Here at Westminster Abbey, the canons still use this space in the way it was first intended.
So, Robert, how would the medieval monks have used this space and lived in here?
This is the little cloister, where the elderly monks came to retire into these houses here, where nowadays we live. But here in the heart of the monastery is this open space for God, really.
Yeah. And is it used in exactly the same way? Because you live here now.
Yes, indeed. This is my front door we're passing.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so there's, the canons live here and some of the other abbey staff live here. Yeah. And we're doing what the monks would have done here, this exercised here. And they would have worked here. They would have sat on benches here with the light streaming in from this open space and got on with writing their medieval documents.
Yeah, so it's amazing. I mean, it's got a very strong mood, isn't it? A very strong feel. I mean, I can imagine it's a very simple and easy place to think.
Yeah.
Well, we're not all fortunate enough to have a lovely old medieval wall like this in our own gardens. And here at Westminster Abbey, they've just left it. They've got the campanula and the daisies around the bottom, gives a nice loose feel, and I think that's the absolute key.
The medieval garden was rarely formally planted. In fact, plants were generally grown for medicinal and culinary purposes, like this bay.
And they'd be looking for plants that would take away the general whiff of the whole area, because hygiene wasn't one of their strong points. And when you crush the leaves, it releases a lovely strong scent.
Bay and lavender were known for their strong scent. Lavender was used in baths and as a moth repellent. This French lavender, once flowers, should be cut well back to keep its nice dome shape.
And then sage was another very popular plant of the time, because this represented wisdom, you know, the old sage. And also, of course, it can be used in cooking too.
I'm planting two varieties of sage, one for leaf texture and one for colour.
The great thing about containers is you can move them around the garden to keep your garden looking fresh. And something like this with really good scented plants you can put right next to a seating area, so you can really benefit from the scent of those plants. And of course they make great gifts as well. And I've just worked out what I'm going to do with this.
Hello there.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.
Later in the medieval period, in the 14th century AD, the Black Death ravaged, the peasants revolted, it was a land gripped by fear.
This was very much the castle and moat era. The walls were fortified and strengthened for protection and to keep people out. But within, walled gardens were created, more by accident of architecture than by design.
Arundel Castle in West Sussex is a fine example of keeping the tradition of a walled castle garden alive. Rarely seen, as they're the private gardens of the Duke and Duchess of Norfolk.
There's something about human nature, I think, that once a space is given to them, that they will use it and decorate it more ornamentally than perhaps is necessary. There just seems to be a need to make something beautiful. So out of those very utilitarian, practical beginnings became man's desire to decorate and make ornamental gardens.
These gardens were still much more for pleasure than fruitfulness. Troubadours refer to lovers meeting in enclosed gardens away from the prying eyes and the bustle of the great hall. Oh, if only walls could talk.
All in a garden green, two lovers sat at ease. As they could scarce be seen,
We often think of a very sort of romantic view of medieval gardens, and indeed wealthy people would have very special ornamental gardens. And those are the ones I think that really we can think of as the paradise on earth, the need to create something beautiful in an otherwise very harsh and brutal life.
be not thus afraid, but rest thee still secure.
Queen Eleanor's garden in Winchester is another stunning example of an early medieval garden and shows practical and decorative features that some of us have adapted into our gardens today.
So a central water feature wasn't uncommon, and again for the very wealthy and only the very wealthy there would be stone pools. But it was the water itself which was symbolic of new life, and it was a contemplative feature as well. Then, on a very more practical basis, Queen Eleanor's garden again has got the beautiful arch-topped pergola or tunnel, which the ladies would walk under, covered in vines and roses and honeysuckle, which was simply a device for creating shade. Ladies of the medieval period favoured very fair complexions, so to sit in the shade of an arbour or a tree was something that was very popular with courtly ladies. Probably the most important colour in a medieval garden was the colour green. It was a reflective colour, a contemplative colour. The garden had to rely on the colour green in the form of evergreen plants or turf. Medieval gardeners really actually didn't worry too much about keeping a fine turf because it was quite an ornamental device to allow wildflowers to grow. Often the grass itself was left to grow quite long. And so the idea of a paradise on earth, a heaven on earth, was something that could be created within a garden by using plants and the structures and environments outdoors.
As the Tudor times approached, there was a sense of new bravery. It was the end of the War of the Roses. Henry VIII ordered that fortified walls should be demolished. No longer a sense of enclosure, caution was replaced by confidence, privacy replaced by a growing pride in their surroundings.
Well, at Penshurst we've got a very long history of enclosure, of walled spaces. But during the medieval period, they were principally to sort of keep everything in and keep people out. It was very defensive. During the Tudor period, a lot of these defensive walls were taken down. There was a whole different attitude. They were looking out. They weren't looking in anymore. They weren't afraid. There was this whole feeling of England was at peace. So the garden started to look out for the first time, and they were very much a statement of what they could achieve.
With records that go back 7 centuries, Penshurst Place in Kent is a great example of how walls changed their purpose in the late Tudor period.
Defensive walls were coming down, other walls were springing up, as it were, but they were different sorts of walls. For one, they were using brick, which was a very expensive medium to use, so they were building brick walls, and they were building them in a different way. And the main reason that they wanted these walls was to grow fruit trees upon them. So the walls had a completely different purpose. The Italian term utili dulci sort of comes to mind, the beauty with utility, because they still were beautiful in many ways, and they were decorated walls, but they had this very practical purpose. They were for growing the fruit, which was a status symbol at the time.
This was captured in a beautiful poem by Ben Jonson entitled To Penshurst.
The blushing apricot and woolly peach hang on thy walls, that every child may reach. And though thy walls be of the country stone, they're reared with no man's ruin, no man's groan.
Robert Sidney would have fruit sent up when he was attending the Queen at court, and so it was very much a thing to have your peaches sent to your rooms and whatever when you were at court. It was very much a status symbol.
But this was early days in the history of fruit snob culture. 300 years later, at houses like Tatton Park, horticultural one-upmanship really came into its own.
See them again.
1911 was the age of ease and opulence, and the one thing that was really highlighted at that time was entertainment.
How are you, dear boys? Nice to see you again.
The lists and menus in the household were extravagant, even by today's standards.
200 French beans,
Yes.
113 heads of asparagus, 9 cucumbers, 26 bunches of grapes,
Yes.
strawberries, 453.
So the kitchen garden was the powerhouse of the whole thing. It supplied every needs of the family to make this entertaining something really special. The greatest status symbol any of the aristocracy could in fact have was to sit down at dinner and say, "Haven't you had garden peas yet?" "Oh, I had mine 2 weeks ago." And that was the great thing, that was the great one-upmanship about those gardens.
So what was the secret of successful one-upmanship? Cheating. Cheating the seasons.
The garden assistant says, in the open ground, forcing is frequently effected by covering the roots of rhubarb with pots, or flower pots, which are afterwards surrounded by a hot dung or mixture of stable litter. So the rhubarb is looking for light, so it's drawn up, and in doing so, it produces very tender, tasty sticks. And they're of much superior quality, a lot sweeter than those produced in the open ground. I mean, from maybe cheating the seasons by a week or two out by the walls, in a magnificent glasshouse like this, you can cheat the seasons by turning winter into spring, if you like, and increases the range of productive crops twofold. You're getting 2 seasons, really, out of 1 year.
Early strawberries. April.
It wasn't just about getting your fruit before anyone else, it was also about having it longer than anyone else.
One of the interesting ways that they would extend the seasons is with their grapes. For instance, they would be cut on a piece of the vine rod, a bunch of grapes like this, usually the late thick-skinned varieties such as Black Amber or the White Muscat, and they would be put into these special fruit rooms and special jars and glasses like this. And the vine rod would be inserted into some fresh boiled water, like so. And to extend the season right up until probably March, they would pop a piece of charcoal in the back there, keep the water nice and sweet. So in a nice, dark, cool environment, you could be enjoying these grapes right up until March. In a large estate garden like Tatton, attention to detail was everything. The amount of investment, time and energy that the owner had put into the garden, he demanded that what he got the return from that garden was immaculate. It was free from blemishes, free from any pest damage, and it was presentable to any guest that was coming to the house. And the only way they could do that was continual monitoring of crops. They weren't just being fussy when they required perfect fruit for the table, because perfect fruit actually stores a lot better. It will keep for much longer. There's no blemishes or bruises on it.
So how long would it last?
Well, up until May of the following year, if it's stored correctly.
Right, so apple pie nearly all year round then?
Absolutely, yeah.
The growing of fruit and herbs has played a part in our Persian, Roman, medieval and Tudor walled garden. In the next century, it's about to take on a whole new significance.
It's this period in time, the 1600s, where we see the walled garden take on its rudimentary beginnings as a traditional kitchen garden, the one that we know today.
As the 1600s progressed, so gardeners discovered the usefulness of walls, not only for pinning fruit trees against, but leaning very primitive forms of glasshouse against. So the more walls you had and the higher they were, the more fruit you were able to grow.
In 1642, the Civil War brought back royalists from abroad and also fleeing Huguenots, and with them came new ways of training fruits and new fruits to train. Towards the end of the century, everyone wanted a taste of these new exotic varieties, and there developed a craze for fruit training.
Everybody wanted to grow these new fruits on their new walls in the new style, and this was encouraged greatly by the example of the royal family, which was then William of Orange and his English wife Mary. So there was really what you could say a sort of craze for fruit tree growing, and with this craze people needed advice, and one of the best books written on the subject was by the head gardener of Louis XIV at Versailles.
Jean de la Quintanille was the most famous gardener of his age, and one of his very rare additions, only 3 surviving in Britain, has found its way into the Tatton Park collection.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, Versailles, the gardens of Versailles, looking down at it in plan form, it's just perfect geometry. Yeah. It's made so ordered.
It's perhaps, the grandest kitchen garden ever made. Louis XIV's kitchen garden, 1697.
So how did this book end up here then?
Well, an uncle of the family who lived here died, and this book's inherited by Samuel Edgerton from the Edgerton family in the 1700s.
And they were living in Tatton Park?
In Tatton Park, yeah.
Right.
And the formation of the gardens is around that time. Yeah. Certainly the start of the fruit garden is around the 1750s, 1760s.
So do you think that this book actually influenced the way the gardens are laid out here?
I've no doubt. I've absolutely no doubt. I mean, some of the forms of trees, some of the layout of the trees, it's identical to what you see here.
It's amazing. You know, you can go to Versailles, you buy a fantastic book, bring it back. I suppose that's the way communication worked in those days. You know, you didn't have the internet, you know, you didn't have magazines coming out all over the place. You know, information was passed on through books like this.
This would be really modern, really up-to-date. This would be that cutting-edge horticulture in its day.
Yeah.
Well, this is something I'm sure Monsieur Le Quintanille would have recognised, all these tree forms around us here, exactly what he was growing in 1697 for the King of France. You know, we've got cordon here, we've got goblet, we've got espalier, we've got fan training, pretty much in the English style, which is a little bit more restrained than the French style. But I'm sure, you know, it'd be very recognisable to a grower 200 years ago, just the same kind of growing methods.
Well, they look fantastic, but also it's an economic use of space, isn't it?
Yeah, very much, I mean, you can get, we've got a 40-metre run here, we've got 40 different varieties in a run like this. I mean, you can use a small wall, you can have a single variety, you can even put them a little bit closer than we have. You can get a lot in a small space.
Aesthetic enhancing and training of fruit trees is a bit like cosmetic surgery, and it reached its peak in the late 19th century.
It's about making a productive area pretty, making it attractive, and certainly on these principal walks in a kitchen garden where on a Sunday the family would take the guests out for a walk, they'd like to see these kind of modern varieties of apple trained as attractive forms, really. This job is usually performed in February and March. The reason that it's the best time in February and March is that the branches are the most pliable. They're easily bent into shape because all the sap's running up through the tree makes the branches nice and bendy, and you can train it into many varieties of shapes it'll take. The most common shapes are kind of open vase shapes, really. It actually suits the tree because it gives it plenty of light and air, lets the fruit ripen as well. All these ways of fan training, espaliers and corns are a way of restricting growth to induce fruiting.
This was the height of fashion in the late 1800s, but a century before there were quite different views emerging, spearheaded by writers and philosophers. In 1712, Joseph Addison wrote in The Spectator,
I would rather look upon a tree in all its luxuriancy and diffusion of branches than when it is cut thus and trimmed into a mathematical figure.
By the mid-1700s, something was stirring in the undergrowth. Something big was about to happen.
The landscape movement had come to town. The likes of Capability Brown wanted to bring nature right up to the back door. So the wall garden was banished. Out of sight, out of mind.
Away with the unsightly chimneys, the smell of manure, those nasty high walls that got in the way and cluttered up the Arcadian vision of grottos and haystacks.
All over Britain, paradise in the form of the wall garden wasn't so much lost as repositioned in a place that wouldn't offend, tucked away at the bottom of the garden. But it was a new start. While the landscape movement was painting its picture of a rural idyll, the kitchen garden was breaking new ground. Pineapples were being grown for the very first time.
The pineapple, in the most remarkable way, became a horticultural status symbol. It was the equivalent of having a really smart car today. The absolute mania for growing pineapples led to great things in glasshouse development. You might say the pineapple led the way in the 1700s for glasshouse design. By the end of the 1780s, people had built such elaborate houses for their pineapples that they thought, well, we might as well use it for something else.
So vines were incorporated to make the most of the space. These buildings were called pinery vineries, and only the finest houses in the land would have one. Tatton was no exception.
I'm standing on the site of the pinery vinery. It stood up until relatively recently, and we want it to stand again. We've done the productive parts of the garden. This building is the sort of the bee's knees, really, in terms of glass houses. Funding permitted, we'll have it back in order again. That's my real wish for this garden.
The pinery vinery might have been the ultimate 18th century must-have for the very rich, but what was actually happening on a simpler level during this century was an understanding of how to create the perfect microclimate.
In my opinion, a south wall inclining about 20 degrees to the east is preferable to any other, inasmuch as the sun shines as early on it as on a full east wall.
In Tatton's reconstruction, they're following similar guidelines printed 100 years later.
The principal points to be considered in the formation of the fruit and vegetable garden, popularly called the kitchen garden, are 1. Site, 2. Soil, 3. Size,
4. Form, 5. Shelter. We've utilised this space in the garden to its best advantage in that we've really followed what it's told us to do in the garden assistant, to use which walls, when to use them, what to sow by the walls and what to use as protection for certain times of the year. In fact, we're growing in a big brick box. That brick box has the effect of dropping this point in Cheshire 7 degrees towards the equator. So we're actually growing in the same conditions just south of Paris.
In the vegetable garden, what you find there is that the garden is built, it runs down on a slope and it runs to one corner, which is really odd. But that means that the frost starts at the bottom, and as it works its way up from the bottom of the garden, if you plant your early potatoes on the top part of the garden, they never get frosted, whereas anything down on the bottom will definitely get frosted.
This is a garden carefully designed to make the best use of its site, the best use of its soils, and the best use of the opportunities that those two things give to the gardener in terms of producing the best fruit, the best vegetables.
That's what it's all about, maximising opportunities. And the same principles apply no matter how big or small the space. And many of us today have a walled backyard, and amateur gardener Andy Bernhardt in North London has spent the last 5 years developing his.
Now, Andy, your north-facing wall has got loads of stuff growing on it, so, it's not a problematic area, is it?
Well, no. You can see this pyracantha absolutely loves this spot. It's in great blossom, and I've heard people criticise this really severely for its spikes, and they say it's unpleasant. And yes, the spikes, they do cut you if you're very reckless and you dive in, but it deters the burglars. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I like it for that alone.
To get the most out of your walls, it's crucial to understand the orientation of your garden.
Take this garden, for instance. This faces north this way, so that wall is actually south-facing and is a hot wall. Now, that wall over there, that's a south wall, but it's facing north. So, in fact, that's always in shade and is much cooler. So, understanding how your garden works and the plants that you put into it are absolutely critical for its success. Now, a north-facing wall won't get any sun at all, but behind me we've got a west-facing wall which will catch the evening sun, so it'll be half shady and half sunny, so it will warm up. Something like this honeysuckle is the perfect plant to grow up in. This is honeysuckle gold flame, and it will get to about 8 feet tall. It does need some support for it to climb up and clamber up, but it's a really, really lovely plant. Now, over there, that's an east-facing wall, facing east, so it gets the morning sun. But there are loads of plants that you can grow up there too. Something like this rose is absolutely perfect. It's called Maygold. It's a yellow rose, you can see, strongly scented, really nice. Again, will need good support. So think about using your walls, think about how much sun they're going to get, and think about planting the right plants accordingly. Andy, this is your south-facing wall, so this must get a lot of heat in here.
It does. As you say, it faces south. It's enclosed on both sides, so it's a tightly enclosed space. And also, we put stone down, which brings the heat up as well. And we popped it in, I don't know, 18 months ago, and it's gone like a rocket.
Well, this vine.
Yeah, absolutely flown up, and it's producing grapes now.
Yeah, well, it's the heat of the wall, you see. I mean, the wall really will retain the heat. I mean, even if you feel it now, it's warmer than the air around it, you know, and on a summer's evening, it will hold the heat all night. It's incredible. You know, and the vine is loving it, isn't it? Something like this fig.
Oh, yeah.
This is Ficus brown turkey. It's a really good fruiting fig. Look at the foliage, really nice big leaves. That again is a plant that will love a south-facing wall like this. And you can just plant it in there, try and restrict its roots a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, and then fan it out and keep it well pruned, otherwise it really will take off.
And it's a fruiting fig?
It's a fruiting fig, yeah. It's a 2-year period, the fruiting process, but you should get some fruit as long as it can get enough heat from that wall.
Okay.
Now, back in time, it wasn't just the natural rays of the sun that heated the walls. There were other methods that were a little bit more man-made.
This is a fire to fire a hot wall. A hot wall was very primitive technology, but used just to keep the frost off a wall, to enable more tender and exotic fruits like figs and peaches to be grown on a south-facing aspect right through the year, whether it was under glass or as an open wall. But the aim of the exercise, which would be to light a fire like this about 4 o'clock in the morning, would be to heat the wall sufficiently as to feel like your hand would be after a few minutes next to your bosom.
By the beginning of the 19th century, the now humbled wall garden might have been tucked away, but it was becoming a horticultural hotbed, and every single effort was being put into making it as productive as possible. In 1843, with the abolition of the glass tax, glass houses like this became the single most stunning feature in the Victorian kitchen garden.
This is when Tatton Park was at its peak.
Well, Sam, this is a stunning example of a Victorian glass house if ever I've seen one. It's beautiful. When was it built and who by?
It was built about the mid-1800s, and it was built by Paxton and his crowd. You know, they were busy, the firm were busy building Crystal Palace and everything else, so this was a kind of add-on bit, you know, we'll go and do this job in Cheshire, so it's great.
Yeah, but it links in with the plant hunters, doesn't it? Going abroad, bringing back all these, you know, rare and unusual ferns especially they loved, and having to have somewhere to grow them.
That's right. They went and collected these things in the wild or had them brought back. They were brought back when they were so high. They thought, well, you know, we've got to have somewhere. We've seen these things growing in the wild, you know, they're big, so we better have somewhere big to put them.
Such exciting times, though, to have, you know, to have the whole world within a space like this, you know.
World in a garden, you know.
Yeah.
You can travel the world without going outside of the walls. That must have been fantastic.
Yeah.
The Edgerton family, the owners of Tatton Park, collected plants from all over the world. One of their favourites was the orchid.
It was interesting that plants were so valuable that they actually decided to have the hot water pipes and heat in greenhouses before they ever thought about having it in houses. Because, you know, people were dispensable. You could find more people, but if your plants died, you had a big problem.
So the walled garden and its many greenhouses didn't just serve a utilitarian need, it was there to provide beauty too, in the form of pot plants and cut flowers.
So what we've got here is 3 beds of helichrysum, statice, larkspur. So it's more accurate to call it a productive garden because it's producing not only fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, but also flower as well for the house.
It was often the head gardener's responsibility for all the floral arrangements in the house.
Gardeners in the heyday of walled gardens and everything else were very, very highly thought of. They would often be poached and headhunted by certain members of the aristocracy as being the best.
The head gardener was absolute god, and you can see from his house. They were the only people who were allowed to take the fruit to the house, in case that, you know, anyone lower than the head gardener with his gloves on might damage the fruit. the gardens were as important to the owner as his house. But the head gardener would actually have reached his position through years and years of graft. He was on a par with the butler or the cook.
It was a very rigid hierarchy. You would start as an apprentice, as a pot boy, work your way up, and if you showed promise, then you may be taken on as a full apprentice, which they would call a journeyman. And if you showed promise that, you became a journeyman improver, and then you showed promise again, you become a journeyman proper. And then you become a fully trained gardener, with a view then to becoming foreman gardener and head gardener.
But for many, rising through the ranks was about to take on a whole new meaning.
There's no doubt that during the Victorian and Edwardian periods, the walled garden was at its horticultural peak. But in 1914, war was declared.
Oh, that some warning voice had cried out in paradise while there was still time.
Over the next 2 world wars, walled gardens generally fell into disrepair. They became abandoned and neglected.
War-torn Britain needed soldiers on the front line and not in the flower beds.
Some walled gardens helped the war effort in any way they could, from providing food for injured servicemen to showing rationed Britons how to grow their own vegetables. But after both world wars, walled gardens really lost their way. With cheap food in new supermarkets, there was really no need for big productive kitchen gardens. They became car parks and swimming pools, or if they were lucky, rose gardens. Some, like Tatton Park, have been lucky to be rejuvenated as part of keeping history alive.
Obviously, we're trying to be as authentic as possible in the way we grow things and the way we cultivate the plants, but we have to make concessions to the modern age, if you like, in that jobs now that we have to use powered mowers, we have to use strimmers. For the sake of time, we only have 3 members of staff working in this garden full time, whereas 100 years ago there'd be over 30, 40 members of staff in a garden at this time of year.
Pony Power, the 20th century lawnmower.
The 1911 version of the strimmer. The only way you could really get round trees, round edges, you certainly couldn't get a lawnmower up to the edges, so you've just got to get on your hands and knees, do it by hand. There are some things that modern gardening will never be able to substitute, which is that attention to detail and attention to individual plants. This is the modern-day equivalent of the 1911 syringe. The only single advantage it has over that is it carries more water. The 1911 syringe is far more adjustable than this and does a far better job.
What's this? It looks like a radio aerial.
Yeah, it's quite a contraption, isn't it?
There's a lot of work in these frames, you know. We spent 3 days working on this, in the rain.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh.
The principle is that you plant the seeds under the apex of these strings here.
Yes.
They'll wind their way up the strings. In doing so, the pods hang very straight.
Oh, right.
Nice, long, straight pods, full air and sun around them.
Yeah, so no curly ones.
No curly ones. Our nice straight beams end up with nice big curly ones like that. What's going on?
I don't know. Did we plant them the wrong way up, do you think?
We'll have to try and do better next year, won't we?
You think it's the variety?
I think it is. This is the yellow anelio, isn't it? You've not been in at night and wound them up, have you?
Well, I mean, if I had, I wouldn't tell you
That's
that, would
quite
I?
possible, isn't it? However, these are about as straight as we've got, aren't they?
Yeah, they're getting there.
Yeah. These old methods may be very hard work, but there's something very fulfilling about getting back to basics.
Tatton's a great example of keeping history alive and remembering the walled garden in its former glory. But these days there's no real economic need for them. So, what's the future?
There are garden designers today trying to take the walled garden into the future. The Dutch designer Piet Oudolf has turned Scampston in North Yorkshire into a stunning contemporary space.
Piet Oudolf is well known for his prairie planting, mixing grasses and perennials together, drifting them through each other. But what's interesting here is that he's combined it with formality. We've got yew planting, we've got beech hedges, we've got lots of box plants, and that really helps define the spaces. So in essence, he's taken the shell of a walled garden, but he's reinvented it. He's put contemporary planting into it, and it really works well. He's mixed the old with the new.
Designer Tom Stewart-Smith has also mixed the old with the new and broken with convention. He was commissioned to build from scratch a new walled garden at Broughton Grange in Oxfordshire. The fusion of classical garden design with new perennial planting has turned the preconception of a walled garden on its head, taking it full circle back to its Persian roots.
It's a walled garden, but it's more like a kind of paradise garden, really. It's in that it has no point. You know, it's not really for production of vegetables. And unlike most walled gardens, it's part of the landscape, really. I think that's the key thing.
Tom Stewart-Smith has designed his walled garden without a fourth wall, so it actually blends into the landscape.
Some people are quite bemused by it because it's so different to a normal garden in that it doesn't have this connection to the house. It's not a sort of grandiose statement connected to somebody's front living room or their terrace. It's this thing which is somehow separate and inexplicable, and I think that's rather intriguing in a way.
But it's a paradise garden with a difference. Not constrained by classical geometry, it flows freely.
Perhaps early classical gardens were four square and axial because that's the way the world was, you know. Now, not only is the world a bit odder, but also we're more aware of all these sort of outside influences, and particularly here, you know, what the outer landscape is doing, a church spire over there, a hill over there. And I certainly did have a very conscious decision that this was not going to be a garden which, you know, had a path down the middle and a fountain in the centre and all that kind of stuff. You know, we've been there, we've done that. I was trying to get across the idea of layers of formality. I mean, you've got the structure of the garden, which, completely unplanted, is very, very severe and very formal. Then you've got the formalised plantings, so like the beech, the yews, the limes, which are clipped, but they're still sort of semi-natural. And then pretty much all the rest of the planting is this sort of, you know, very, very naturalistic wash of plants, things often repeated as they are in nature.
The traditional parterre has been given a contemporary twist.
I took 3 leaves from the main species of tree growing around the garden, which are ash, beech and oak, and magnified them under a microscope by about 6,000 times, and then took the venation pattern that was produced and digitized it just on a scanner. And that gives the pattern of the box in the parterre, if you call it that. So it gets us away from the idea of a parterre as some sort of formal Renaissance thing, and it being much more an abstract representation of nature in some way. I think sometimes it's a mistake to go and look at gardens and say, right, I'll have that bit, you know, back home. It's much better to absorb some of the sort of broader ideas and think about, look at the way a garden relates to the landscape or the particular plant associations are used. You know, it's often little things like that, more than a big idea that can be translated, I think.
I think what Tom says there is absolutely true. It's about the garden sitting comfortably in its setting. And here we're in the middle of London. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, these shrubs hide the boundaries of this garden, which is very important. Otherwise, when you go into the garden, all you see are the boundaries. Whereas here, the garden could go on forever. And actually, there's a very clever use of borrowing next door's trees and bringing them into this garden. So in a way, you're blurring the space between it. And there's also a very good tip here. There's a lovely mirror set in the wall here. You'd never know it was there. It looks almost as if there's a hole in the wall because it's surrounded with greenery and the illusion is very, very successful.
Never be ashamed of repeating a good idea.
Now, the whole illusion's ruined if the first thing you see is yourself. Now, that's no good. If you angle it a bit more forward, I think.
Forward, yeah.
Yeah, a bit more, a bit more. There. Now, what about some plants then? I mean, if you use blue plants, yeah?
Yep.
Like these soft blue plants in front, like these lovely geraniums, Now that gives the feeling that it sort of recedes away.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that works. But if you use something like, say, a hotter colour, like this lovely geum, now that's going to zing out. That's going to really draw your eye. Okay, it might be too shady for it, but it's...
Yeah.
It just shows that actually it foreshortens the garden.
It does.
But you know what I'm thinking? Because you've got turf either side, you see turf this side and turf the other side, I think maybe it should be turf.
What, so roll it up to the mirror so it looks like it's going straight through and on?
It'd be great, wouldn't it?
OK.
Let's have a go.
Right,
We've got a roll of turf here.
And if it doesn't work, I blame you.
Let's just see it for effect.
All right.
Now let's see if we stand back and have a look at that.
Let's have a go.
Tell you what.
Wow.
That's quite amazing, isn't it? It's quite unexpected, really.
There's an element of the unexpected with all experiments. The Tatton Park restoration team have had their fair share of surprises.
One of the things we're finding amazing is the actual size of some of these vegetables that we're growing. We're now harvesting, and we're finding that some of these varieties of cauliflower and cabbage are twice the size you'd expect in some of the supermarkets. Now, if we turn the clock back to 1911, this is probably about the right size they should be. You've got to remember that these vegetables were feeding households of up to 200 people. So a large vegetable would be a good thing, but what we're finding now is a difficulty selling something that size. People really don't want to be bothered buying something that they're going to be eating over the next 2 or 3 days.
Not everyone's deterred by the size of the veg, and although it's still early days, it's clear the dedication and hard work of the Tatton Park team is beginning to pay off.
Well, chaps, an incredible amount of work has gone into this place. You know, how does it feel now?
It's been a great opportunity for a gardener to be able to experiment really with the past, experiment with the varieties of the past and experiment with the techniques of growing of the past, and really hopefully bring something new to the future of gardening.
Sam?
I think really it's all about nostalgia, how it feels to be part of the past, really. And I think the idea of, you go out in the garden on a Sunday afternoon and you see the grandparents with their grandchildren popping the pods of the peas and go, whoa, that's what they taste like, and there's a carrot, and that's just absolutely, that just says it all. That makes it all worthwhile. Fantastic.
And Tatton have now secured a grant to restore their pinery vinery.
Cheers. Well, congratulations to Tatton for holding on to some of our important horticultural heritage. But it seems to me that the wall garden has actually gone full circle. It started off as paradise, as an oasis, somewhere to escape. It's all about manipulating nature within an enclosure. And then it became a productive vegetable garden. But now it seems to have come back. It's a pleasure space. It's a place to relax and enjoy and escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So maybe if you're looking for paradise, you don't have to look too far. Maybe it's in your own backyard.
If you want to go and see Tatton Park or any of the other gardens I visited, the details are on the website, bbc.co.uk/gardening.
More inspiration for gardeners next on BBC Two at Hampton Court.